Great Demon King. Chapter 2. The Uncultured are scary. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force owned the most land in the Lancelot Empire and held the highest reputation within the empire. It was also one of the most important training institutions for the empire's mages and knights. The academy was further divided into several departments: light, dark, fire, water, wind, earth, thunder, summoning, and space. Each department had its own independent classroom building, library, laboratory, training field, and living district, functioning as small cities. Bryan was an errand slave for the Necromancy Major, a subcategory of the Department of Dark Magic. Because Necromancy Majors had to work with skeletons, zombies, and the like, and because this major had fallen off the radar for many years, it was not only the most unpopular major, but also the weakest. Even other dark magic department students scoffed at Necromancy Majors and didn't deign to form teams with them. Bryan belonged to the weakest and most despised major during his 6 years of running errands for the academy. Adding to that, his special tasks of transporting corpses and skeletons subjected him to endless eye rolls and cold shoulders. Every day was a living hell for him. Han Shuo followed Bryan's memories and arrived at a small path in the mountains located at the back of the academy. He entered through a small gate reserved especially for errand slaves returning in the dead of night. Other students had long since gone to sleep because it was midnight. Since Han Shuo was taking a secluded path, he didn't encounter anyone on his way back. He observed his surroundings along the way and noted that the architectural style of Babylon Academy was similar to some of the Western European countries back on Earth. He finally made his way back to the Necromancy Major's designated area with some effort. Bryan lived in a warehouse, a place befitting his position. The warehouse was filled with random items, most of which were discarded junk or ingredients left over from experiments. Most of these items awaited Bryan's organization and disposal. Necromancy students would often toss their unwanted items through the warehouse window for Bryan to take care of. The warehouse was not very large to begin with, excluding all the random junk. The only other thing present was a small wooden bed. Even this bed was sometimes covered by a mountain of trash, as the students never paid attention to where they threw their unwanted items. The first thing Bryan did whenever he finished his work late at night was to clean up the trash on his bed. He had to dispose of it before anyone woke up the next morning, and then turn his attention to other tasks. When Han Shuo took in his quarters, which resembled more of a garbage dump than anything, his eyes misted up, and he felt deep pangs of sympathy for the unfortunate youth. How could Bryan have survived those 6 years? The air in the warehouse was foul beyond belief. Even opening the windows had very little effect, as the smell emanated from the mountain of trash. More items were piled up on the small bed, indicating that some had continued the habit of dumping trash here even after Bryan's death. As Han Shuo shuffled his feet, he felt that even taking a few steps was an arduous task. The ground was covered with abandoned litter. He finally reached the bed and was about to clean it off, just like Bryan always did. But Han Shuo was not Bryan. When he was halfway through, Han Shuo felt a burst of rage. At first, this anger was only half-hearted, but the magical yuan within his body reacted to the anger and started moving rapidly, feeding his rage. Finally, Han Shuo abruptly stopped his movements and fiercely denounced, "I'm not Bryan. I will not stand for this. Bryan, oh Bryan, since I've occupied your body, let me help you punish that Lisa." Han Shuo was unaware that, according to his original personality, he would never have impulsively acted on his thoughts, even if he'd wanted to. The him of yesteryear only had the will to think evil thoughts but lacked the courage to take action. He strode out from the warehouse and turned towards the female living quarters. In the silence of the night, he stealthily made his way towards the living district. Bryan had often cleaned here and was thus quite familiar with the area. Of course, he also knew where Lisa lived. The Necromancy Major had far fewer students than the other majors, and thus every female student had her own room. Each room was spacious and had all the necessities they needed. This was heaven compared to Bryan's house of trash. Lisa lived on the second floor, and Han Shuo could not gain admittance at night. Good thing there was a large tree next to her window. He flattened his body and scampered up the trunk like a skinny monkey. He could peer into her window if he stood on his tiptoes. Han Shuo was secretly delighted when he saw that the window was open. He propped himself up and peeked in. The little witch Lisa had decorated her room in pink, and it actually looked quite cute, especially with the furry toys hanging on the wall above the table. A faint perfumed scent wafted into Han Shuo's nose, causing it to wrinkle. He had not anticipated that the cold-hearted Lisa could decorate her room so cutely. He couldn't hope to best her in a fight, and he knew that. He took a closer look and noticed pink gauze bed curtains in one corner of the room. That should be Lisa's bed. He withdrew a small bottle from his bag and smeared some blood, typically used in experiments, around the edges of his eyes and mouth. He tousled his brown hair after checking his face in a broken mirror that Bryan had picked up. When he looked into the mirror again, a terrifying face covered with bloodstains looked back at him. "If I can't beat you, then I'm going to scare the crap out of you." Han Shuo was quite satisfied with his current makeup and nodded with a low cackle. When everything was ready, he stepped on a branch and swung himself close to Lisa's window, swaying back and forth with the branch. He reached out his bone-thin hand and knocked on Lisa's window. Dawn. Dawn. Lisa was fast asleep when she was woken up by the dawn sounds coming from the window. She groggily opened the pink gauze curtains and walked out barefoot. Little feet as white as jade padded over a carpet that was also pink. Under the peaceful rays of the moon, the 5 pink toes on each foot were actually quite adorable. Lisa was a bit younger than Bryan and was the young lady of a noble household. Disregarding what she had done to Bryan, Lisa was quite a beauty with a head full of long, soft blonde hair, a height of 162 cm that made her just a tad taller than Bryan, delicately arched eyebrows, an elegantly long nose, and endearing red lips. Dressed in pink pajamas, Lisa didn't seem fully awake. After she walked out from the pink bed, she instinctively looked over at the source of the sound. A familiar face covered in blood, with petrifying traces of blood dripping from the eyes and nose, and a thin body swaying back and forth at the window, stared emptily back at her with no sign of life. Wah! A horror-struck scream filled the hallways of the female living district. Han Shuo inwardly grinned evilly and thought, "I'm going to scare you unconscious this time, if not scare you to death." His expression grew more and more chilling as his thoughts intensified. After a while of staring emptily ahead, he rolled his eyes backward and swayed even more strongly. He could no longer see Lisa because he'd rolled his eyes back. There was a sudden lack of sound from Lisa after that initial horror-struck scream, continuing through Han Shuo's gradual facial progression. She probably fainted, Han Shuo thought as sounds of the other Necromancy Major girls cussing floated within hearing. Better to leave while he could. Otherwise he'd be in for a world of hurt if he was caught. An incredible pain spread from the bridge of his nose just as he was about to reverse his eye roll. Another intense pain appeared from the top of his head, causing him to fall off the tree. The fall awakened all his aches and pains and made him see stars. Attacks fell on him like rain shortly thereafter, with a voice yelling as the hits landed. "Bryan, looks like you finally grew a backbone. You escaped death last time, but your brain rotted instead. I major in necromancy and spend my days with skeletons and corpses. You idiot tried to scare me by pretending to be a corpse. I have to really give it to you." Would the future great mage Lisa be unable to determine if a body even has a soul? Although his body hurt, his heart was in even greater pain. That dumb Bryan spent 6 years as an errand slave for the Necromancy Major, but hadn't even picked up this bit of common sense. This was hardly the outcome he expected the first time he'd gathered up his courage to do something bad. Necromancy. This wondrous necromancy could determine even this. There was definitely some value in it. It looks like I have a lot to learn if I'm to survive in this world. Otherwise, the unfortunate events from today will most likely happen again. As the agony in his body increased, Han Shuo continued to think rapidly while howling in pain. The magic of Chu Kanglan's dark path encompassed the word demon, whereas necromancy didn't sound like a great path either. What if he were to train in both of these? Would there be conflict between the two, or would they become stronger together?